Hey everybody, Will and Nate from Dropsource here. Welcome to the Mobile Minute, where we give you quick highlights and tips from what's happening in mobile development today. Today, we want to share a little bit more about some news out of WWDC earlier this month from Apple, where they announced a new feature called Sign In with Apple. Nate, we're all very familiar with Sign In with Facebook, Sign In with Google. It's a common feature that we see on many apps across the app sphere. But what's different about Sign In with Apple? Why is this unique?
Great question. So Sign In with Apple is very similar, like you mentioned, but it's different in the sense that they're really aiming to promote user privacy, building consistent user experiences across all Apple products as well as the web, and make it very convenient for users to sign in. And we see that through things like deep integrations with Touch ID and Face ID, and so that will be really exciting. One example of, from a privacy perspective, how Apple plans to make this better for users is the option to anonymize your email. And so when you log in, you'll have the option to either opt in or opt out of giving apps certain information.
Cool. From a user perspective, that sounds great. As a developer, that sounds like that could create some challenges if you don't have a user email. Technically speaking, is implementing this going to cause any problems or be challenging for developers?
From what we see right now, the process of implementing seems pretty straightforward from the mobile side. They're leveraging very common authentication patterns like OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and so those should be very familiar and pretty straightforward for developers. Where we see some concern and some challenges is when you start to consider cross-platform and how a sign-in with Apple option affects Android apps and how developers will accommodate those.
Can't wait to see sign-in with Apple on Android apps.
One day.
Speaking of, as far as I understand, Apple has said that all apps on the iOS App Store will be required to include this capability going forward. Is that the case?
Not exactly all apps, but all apps that currently have an existing social sign-in option. So things that have login with Facebook, login with Google. Seems like Apple wants to provide users with a more anonymous way of logging in than what Facebook or Google would give you.
Shots fired.
Shots fired.
So as developers, does that news mean that we all need to be scrambling to update our apps and add this new feature in right away? Is this an urgent thing?
Not yet. It's still not even in beta yet. It will be available for beta testing mid to late summer is what they're saying right now. And so at that point, developers should get into the tool, figure out how Sign In with Apple affects their system model, and then start thinking about the different user experiences that they need to build, whether it's just for iOS, whether it's for web, or whether it's for iOS and Android.
But this is going to be something everybody needs to do before they submit an update at some point to the App Store to avoid getting rejected.
Yeah, we've seen this in the past where whenever Apple changes their App Store review guidelines, which this kind of falls under, is that they'll require future app updates to include these changes.
Got it. All right, if you want to learn a little bit more about Sign In with Apple, we have a link in the description to this video. Otherwise, we'd love to see you here again next week for another edition of the Mobile Minute. Thanks.